Hey soccer fans, Nick here with another episode of the Feed the Fire podcast, and this episode is our 2025 MLS Scheduling Show Spectacular. We have all the schedules for all the clubs. We're going to take a look at the league as a whole. We're going to dive right into the Chicago Fire schedule as well and kind of see how their season can ebb and flow throughout all their matchups. We're also going to talk about the other tournaments that will affect clubs this particular season and how there have been some changes to some of those formats and scheduling. But first, I want to remind everyone, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, leave a comment, and when anyone this holiday season asks you, so you listening to any good podcasts, make sure you plug Feed the Fire, a Chicago Fire and MLS podcast. I'd appreciate it so much. Thank you. All right, now into the heart of the show. The first thing about the MLS schedule that we have to remember is the Coachella Invitational Tournament. This is taking place the first 2 weeks of February. We talked about it a lot last episode, so make sure you go back and listen to that and you get the details. But essentially, 14 MLS clubs will be participating. They'll be out in California, training for a couple of weeks, playing in exhibition matches against the other MLS teams. And it's a great way for teams to kind of assess their players' fitness, kind of see how the back end of the depth chart is going to look and what players are going to kind of build some chemistry together. So I do think it's very much a preseason. I wouldn't take a lot out of results or what you see, but it is the first kind of look we're going to get at these MLS teams in 2025. Then the next tournament that we're going to see is the Concacaf Champions Cup. This tournament has always been an X factor for MLS clubs as it puts a lot of extra miles on players' legs early on in the season, and you'll often find participating clubs having to manage their players' minutes by mid-MLS season, and you'll oftentimes see MLS clubs that make a run in CONCACAF Champions Cup or the Continental Tournament, as it has changed names several times recently. You'll often see those clubs hit kind of this midsummer lull where it just looks like they've got dead legs and they kind of limp into the end of the season, and maybe they get some energy back to finish strong into the postseason, or maybe they flame out and don't qualify at all. So this Continental Tournament, the CONCACAF Champions Cup, the tournament for North America here, this can have a huge impact on a Major League Soccer season for each club, as well as for clubs that have to play them. So like the Chicago Fire, they didn't qualify for it, so if they end up matched up against some of these teams, you know, early on in the season or mid-season, it might give the Chicago Fire a slight advantage in endurance and fitness. All right, this year in CONCACAF Champions Cup, there are 27 teams competing. It's a home and away style tournament, and the opening match takes place February 4th. However, thank you to CONCACAF and whoever at MLS was pulling for it, MLS teams don't begin play in CONCACAF Champions Cup until February 18th. Well, gee, that's convenient, right after the Coachella tournament finishes up for them. Isn't that nice how that worked out? Now, before we dive into the bracket, let's take a look at how the MLS teams qualified for it. And there were qualifications through league play, through Leagues Cup, as well as through Open Cup. So the Colorado Rapids qualified as the third place team in the Leagues Cup. The Columbus Crew qualified as the champion of Leagues Cup. And FC Cincinnati qualified based on their ranking in the Supporter Shield standings. Inter Miami won the Supporter Shield and qualified. LAFC, runner-up of the Leagues Cup, qualified. LA Galaxy, MLS Cup champs, qualified. Real Salt Lake and the Seattle Sounders also qualified as the next highest teams in the Supporter Shield standings. SKC qualifies as the U.S. Open Cup finalist, and Vancouver Whitecaps qualify out of Canada as the Canadian Championship champions. And I do find that funny. That's how they listed it. They're the Canadian Championship champions. So those are the 10 MLS clubs that qualified for CONCACAF Champions Cup. Now let's run down the bracket here and see how they matched up. So again, round one for MLS clubs is going to be starting on February 18th. Columbus gets a bye in the first round, and they will play the winner of LAFC and the Colorado Rapids. So you will have at least one MLS club then moving out of the first round and round of 16 into the quarterfinals there. So that is a good sign. kind of the bad sign is also the bottom half of that quarter of the bracket, it's Miami and Sporting Kansas City. So the winner of that matchup is going to play, it looks like Cavalry, and then they will advance, hopefully, to play either Columbus, LAFC, or Colorado. So while these MLS matchups are occurring, while we've got 4 MLS teams in one quarter of the Concacaf Champions Cup bracket, and man, that's a tongue twister. Concacaf Champions Cup, saying it that much, I keep feeling like I'm going to bite my tongue or like trip over myself or spit into the microphone here, whatever it is. So please bear with me, and thank you so much for doing so already. But the disadvantage is you've got 5 MLS teams in one quarter of that bracket, but the advantage is then you're probably going to get an MLS team in the semifinals. Now, staying on that left side of the bracket, moving to the other quarter, you have Vancouver in a first-round matchup against Saprissa, and the winner will most likely take on Monterrey out of Liga MX. They are matched up against Hamilton Forge from the Canadian Premier League. And that is the one MLS team in that part of the bracket, that quadrant. So we have 6 MLS teams on the left side, if you will, 5 in one quarter and 1 in another quarter. Now let's move over to the right side of the bracket as opposed to the left side. And you can go find all this on the CONCACAF website as well. They've got a really nice graphic for you here. In the top quadrant on the right side of the bracket, you have the Seattle Sounders matching up against Antigua, a club from Guatemala. And most likely they will move on to play Cruz Azul, assuming Cruz Azul gets out of their first round matchup. Then in the bottom quadrant of the right side of the bracket, hope you're visualizing all of this with me here, painting you a word picture, you have Cincinnati taking on Motagua, which is a club from Honduras, and assuming they win, they will likely match up against Tigres from Liga MX. So there's going to be some MLS Liga MX matchups potentially very early in this tournament. You have the Galaxy, who get a bye in the first round, and they will likely match up against RSL in the round of 16. Now that does assume that Real Salt Lake will advance past Herediano, one of the top clubs from Costa Rica, probably I'd say the second best club in Costa Rica behind Saprissa, who gets to take on Vancouver. So there's going to be some nice Costa Rica MLS matchups there. But Real Salt Lake, assuming they go for it and they try their best, I think that these MLS clubs should be able to defeat and should be the favorites in each of their matchups unless they are opposing a Liga MX squad. Now, again, I am no CONCACAF expert here. Who knows? Saprissa might have some generational talent who comes out of nowhere. Maybe even I'll call it a mid-tier Liga MX team, Pumas. Maybe they come out of nowhere. Maybe Forge upsets Monterrey, and then they've signed some great young Canadian talent that puts it all together. Who knows? Or maybe you're going to see the Giants as usual. You're going to see LAFC, Miami, Columbus, Club America, Tigres, Saprissa, if you want to consider them a giant of CONCACAF since they're in this tournament so often. Monterrey, those guys pushing through. Could go chalk, could be some upsets. That's the fun of these continental tournaments. So again, those are that's the bracket for CONCACAF Champions Cup. And as far as our conversation as to the MLS schedule, keep in mind how that is going to affect these teams in the regular season. Like I said, MLS clubs will be playing, February 18th through about February 25th, 27th or so for their first round matches. And then the second round of 16, those games will start in the second week of March. I think I'm seeing March 11th as the earliest round that those games would be played. Yep. So after that, we'll see how things shake out and how the quarterfinals look. But yeah, these clubs are going to be playing extra games into March, April, maybe even May, depending on how CONCACAF schedules things. All right, let's move now to the next part of our scheduling conversation, the actual 2025 Major League Soccer season schedule. Opening weekend is February 22nd and 23rd, and shocking news here, everyone. Breaking news, right? The season opener features Inter Miami. They're hosting NYCFC, but at least this time they're not getting their own special day. If you remember last year, Inter Miami opened up with a home match like on a Wednesday night, I think, and then the rest of the league waited until Saturday to play. So at least they're not getting their own day this time. They're just getting the opening match, and they're again hosting NYCFC. Other changes that I noticed in going through the schedule is that the kickoff times have been staggered a little bit more. You won't see any of those days where like the entire Eastern Conference plays at like 3 and 5, and then the entire Western Conference plays at like 7 and 9, or even maybe 11 one night. The opening day matches are staggered, so you have kickoff times at 1:30, 3:30, 6:30, 7:30, and 9:30. So you'll be able to watch a lot of different teams and get your money's worth out of your streaming package. Because that was one thing that I felt slighted as a fan, where I'm paying for this package and I can only watch 2 games live. Personally, I don't like watching sports on replay, especially with the way I follow the league and the way I'm connected on social media and my independent MLS podcasting group chat that is always talking about something or other. There's no way for me to kind of disconnect and be surprised as to the outcome. I do like the fact that MLS is putting out some of those highlight packages after, a couple days after the game. You still got to wait for them. But I like that they stagger the games. That way I can make the time on my Saturdays and on my Sundays and say, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to block off a few hours and just kind of absorb all things Major League Soccer. Maybe go watch a couple Western Conference games after the Fire are done playing. Or in this case, I can tune in. I can see how Miami and New York are going to play before I settle in to my full Chicago Fire match. So that is something that'll be fun. And also for those going to games live, that still means I can get home and catch a game afterwards, or if you really wanted to and you're not tailgating as much, you could watch a game before you go to your match, or you could be watching it in your tailgate. So I like the staggering of the schedule. This is something people were calling for, and hopefully Apple and the league can kind of figure it out and smooth it out, and it only improves as the months and the years go on with this TV deal. So other dates to keep in mind. We said MLS is back weekend, February 22nd to 23rd. Rivalry week, May 14th through 18th. So who is the Chicago Fire's rival if that game is being played May 14th through the 18th? Looking at their schedule here, it is Charlotte. Charlotte is their rivalry matchup. Chicago Fire. I would have liked to see it be the Revs, and I'll touch on that a little later in the show. I got a note about that old rivalry. But I wonder if the league is trying to manufacture a rivalry between Chicago and Charlotte, since the natural rival, St. Louis, is in the Western Conference, and they rarely will play each other. And same thing, Minnesota would probably be a good natural rival. They're in the Western Conference. Columbus and Cincinnati have each other. Nashville is tending to pull towards the south, have a rivalry with Atlanta or maybe even Charlotte there, right? So Chicago's kind of in that no man's land of who's their geographic rival, and they haven't had enough postseason experience to really build a rivalry that way. And I'll just say the note now. That's why I think a rivalry with New England would be great, because those teams did meet in the postseason, I want to say like 4 of 5 years back in the 2000s, and it really did build a rivalry between the clubs and the fan bases, and it was a lot of fun to watch it and go to those games. Other dates to remember, the Club World Cup and Gold Cup will put MLS season on pause, and that is June 15th through the 24th. The All-Star Game, July 23rd. Leagues Cup will run July 29th through August 31st, and then Decision Day, October 18th. Now, regarding Leagues Cup, there's no longer going to be a mid-season pause for MLS. They're not going to take a break from the regular season just to go play Leagues Cup matches. They will be built in within the schedule of the season. Thankfully, this shortens the MLS season, so we're not watching a final in December, but it does put a little more pressure on the clubs and the players. Hopefully, though, it can be a force for positive change and spur the league to make changes to salary caps, roster rules, and obviously you can't add more roster slots, but what you could do is lessen the restrictions on calling up players from your MLS Next Pro teams or your affiliate clubs, and that way you can have fresher legs throughout the course of the season. So hopefully that is something that this could do. Now here's the actual release from Major League Soccer about the new Leagues Cup scheduling changes. The League's Cup Organizing Committee announced today, December 16th, that the 2025 edition of the official Concacaf tournament between Liga MX and MLS will be played July 29th to August 31st, 2025. Similar to Global Cup competitions, League's Cup will take place during the MLS and Liga MX regular seasons this upcoming summer, offering fans exciting international matches. League's Cup will be played in the US and Canada in 2025. The committee also announced that there is a continued review of the 2025 League's Cup format with a focus on delivering more interleague matches. Reflecting the result of research and fan and club feedback, CONCACAF will continue to award 3 qualification berths to the Concacaf Champions Cup to the League Cup champion and second and third place finishers. The format, schedule, and additional information on 2025 League's Cup will be announced in the new year. And that is the statement there. I hope you like my nice little Z-Copy radio voice there. I'll work on it. It's been a long week. I'm already starting to feel it in the vocal cords here. But a couple of things to remind you all. First of all, looking at those key dates that the MLS put out, you'll notice that US Open Cup isn't factored into there at all. So whatever your opinions are of MLS trying to kill Open Cup or honor Open Cup or help support it, I bet that won't sway your opinions too much. But the other thing about League's Cup and Open Cup is that MLS clubs will be participating in the US Open Cup, and there's talk that they're going to kind of divide it into, like, your top tier of MLS clubs will go to League's Cup, then your next tier of MLS clubs will go to Open Cup, and maybe they'll make concessions depending on who is in Champions Cup or defending an Open Cup or defending a League's Cup title, things of that nature. Also, you're going to see a reduced number. You will see a reduced number of MLS clubs in League's Cup. I didn't want to see Chicago play Kansas City in a game that neither team wanted to win. That was a complete waste of everything. It was a miserable game. Of course, the Fire lost. They were playing their third stringers across the pitch, and like neither team really cared. Neither team really cared to win that game and get out of their group of 3 teams here, 2 of them being in MLS. So I'm glad it's going to be a little bit more mixed, less MLS clubs in it. Hopefully you can streamline the competition, have it be just a little bit more meaningful and a little bit more competitive as well. And then that can spread that competitive nature, again, throughout the rest of US Open Cup, MLS regular season, whatever it may be. Maybe you're not going to have... And here's the thing, you are going to have that exciting semifinal, final matchup. You're going to get those matchups, but you're not going to then have all that dead weight at first. So the excitement level is going to rise. It's going to raise the floor, I would say, and you're going to keep a high ceiling for it. So I'm excited that these changes, if implemented the right way, will bring positive change to a crowded MLS schedule. All right, so that is MLS, that is League's Cup, that is Open Cup, that is Champions Cup, and now let's turn our attention to our hometown team here, to the Chicago Fire and their schedule. Let's break down their schedule a little bit, highlight some games, and then we'll kind of go through the schedule as a whole and see maybe where the Fire can really go on a run, or maybe where the fans want to go run and hide. So the 2025 Chicago Fire schedule opens at Columbus on February 2022. Excuse me, stumbling over Concacaf Champions Cup again. Let me try that one more time. The Chicago Fire season opens at Columbus on February 22nd. The home opener is on March 1st versus DC United, and I've already seen a lot of people commenting about how that is going to be a very chilly home opener. But I'll see you there. Absolutely, we're going to be there for that one. The season ends on Decision Day on October 18th. At New England. And here's where I was going to talk about that budding rivalry or rebudding rivalry with the Revolution. Usually MLS schedulers try to put teams that either have something to play for or have a bit of a rivalry, something to keep people interested in the game at the end of the season if it really doesn't mean much for the standings. So I'm glad they're pairing up New England because I think that's a team that the Fire need to kind of use as a measuring stick, where they should have been beating New England last season. They ended up with a draw and a loss, and the only team that was as bad as the Fire for long stretches of that Eastern Conference season were the Revolution. So it just shows you that the Fire did earn their last place finish in the Eastern Conference in 2024. So this is a good measuring stick team, and if the Fire can defeat them on Decision Day, that could have big standing implications. So I like having that match at the end there. Some other notable matches that the Fire will play this season, of course, we'll just say it, the Inter-Miami matches. They will be in Chicago on April 13th, and they will go to Miami on August 30th. And guys, I'm sad to say, and it broke my son's heart, I don't think we're going to be able to go to that game on April 13th. I've been to one of the two Miami games with Messi on the roster. Obviously, Messi, that's one more than Messi, but I just had a feeling that there's no way that the league would allow the club not to play him in Chicago for a third straight season. I don't know, I could be wrong. I've already seen all the joke injury reports that people have been putting together saying that Messi's already injured in April 13th just because he hasn't played in Chicago. But oh well, hopefully I can make a few bucks back on my tickets. The other odd thing that I noticed early on in the season for the Chicago Fire is that between March 15th and the 29th, so those three weekend games in a row, 15th, 22nd, 29th of March, they play all three Canadian teams back to back to back. So we'll take a look at which one's home and which one away, but that's a huge stretch for the Fire too, to be able to play against Montreal and Toronto early on in the season, teams that they need to beat if they are going to try to get into that playoff mix. And Vancouver, a team that had some good success last season, but a team with a new coach, possibly a new identity, possibly some new players, and maybe a team that the Fire could take advantage of early on in the season. August 16th, the Chicago Fire host St. Louis City. And then on July 12th, the Chicago Fire hosts San Diego FC, the new expansion team. So those two games should be a lot of fun to go to. Definitely have them circled on my calendar. Now let's take a look at that Chicago Fire calendar and see. I'll kind of try and break it down by month as we go here to see if there is going to be those chances for some point streaks for the Fire. Obviously, rosters are far from complete, and there's going to be a lot of movement. There's going to be injury. There's going to be everything we talked about with Concacaf Champions Cup and Leagues Cup affecting the schedule. But this is kind of the early look here. So they open against Columbus at Columbus. Then in March, home versus DC, away games to Dallas, Toronto, Vancouver, and then back home against Montreal. So that Vancouver one, I bet they'll be happy with a draw if they can come back from across the continent in order with a point. And that's going to be weird. I wonder if they're just going to stay in Canada. They're in Toronto the week before, and they got to fly to Vancouver. Maybe they just stay up there. I don't know. But this is a slate of games that the Fire could get off to a really good start. I don't expect them to play very well against Columbus. We all know how good Columbus is, and I don't think they've gotten any worse. If anything, they're going to be better by the time the season opens. Maybe if they start believing their own hype, maybe if there were some rumors still circulating about Wilfred Nancy moving to a bigger club or any of their players getting transferred, maybe that kind of creeps in and has them playing a little bit below their usual expectations, and the Fire can come away with a result. But I'm not expecting much out of the Fire. But it is a home opener, or it is an opener. It's the season opener. First game of the season. Anything can happen. There's no history. There's no trends. There's nothing established. So this could be a surprise game for the Fire to get a point out of it, or maybe even 3 points. But again, I'm not expecting too much, which is going to be kind of the theme of this Chicago Fire season. I'm not going to expect too much. Just get back to the playoffs, all right? And then you've got those teams in the conference you should be ahead of in terms of the final standings. DC, Toronto, Montreal. So some good chances to get some points against teams you're going to be competing for playoff spots, where I kind of see the Fire in that kind of like 7 to 11 range in the Eastern Conference. Now in April, they're away at Red Bulls, home against Miami and Cincinnati, and then away at Nashville. This is going to be a very tough stretch. The Fire may not win a game in April, or they may come away with just a couple points, depending on how the Red Bulls look and how Nashville look. But again, those are away games for the Fire. Going to be tough. And then moving into May, they have home games against Orlando and Atlanta, away games at Charlotte, New York City, and Orlando again. So this is we'll call it their southern tour here, but for that New York City match thrown in there. But oddly enough, they're playing Orlando in quick succession yet again. I feel like the last couple seasons they have played Orlando home and away within like 4 to 6 weeks of each other each time. And I would love for the league to come up with some sort of balanced schedule where you have similar opponents in the first half and the second half. But that's just near impossible with Leagues Cup, Open Cup, Champions Cup, cross-conference play, and all the other things that go into making an MLS schedule. So I would love for them to do it, but I'm not going to hold my breath. Again, though, these are teams that the Chicago Fire, if they get off to that good start in March and April, need to be looking, can we take points from Orlando, who are down Facundo Torres, who's been transferred out to Palmeiras for what is being reported a record-setting fee for Orlando City. Can they take points at Charlotte and kind of keep Charlotte on par with them in the playoff standing, similar to Atlanta? Another good kind of measuring month there for the Fire. Then we get into June. This is where the Fire need to pick up their points and really need to make a statement. They go to DC, but then are at home against Nashville, Philadelphia, and Charlotte. This is a month, June is the month, where the Fire could come away with a minimum of 8 points in 4 games, possibly 10 points in 4 games, and could really be a boost before they get into whatever's going on and whatever teams are going to end up in Leagues Cup. July, they're back and forth a lot. At Cincinnati, home against San Diego, at Atlanta and Montreal, and then home against Red Bulls. I'm really excited for that San Diego game. I think it's going to be great to see what this expansion team brings to MLS and how well they're going to be playing in July. We've seen expansion teams really get out to hot starts, but are they going to be able to do it in the summer heat in Chicago? Hopefully, if you're training in San Diego, you're a little bit used to it, but maybe not used to that oppressive heat, just that beautiful 70s and sunny every day, not the 95 and humid on the lakefront kind of a day that you might get in Chicago in July. August also sees the Chicago Fire splitting their home and away games, but they are at home to their non-conference opponents, LAFC and St. Louis. And hopefully, LAFC and St. Louis come into these games thinking, it's a cross-conference game, let's just get a point and get out of here, and the Fire can take advantage of that mentality. Then they go on the road to Philadelphia and Miami. The season starts to draw to a close in September. The Fire are hosting New England, New York City. They go up to Minnesota, another cross-conference game, and then back home to Columbus. So they play Columbus on opening day, and then they don't see them again until September 27th, 7 months later. Who knows what those teams are going to look at that point and what kind of game it's going to be. Then the season ends in October. The Chicago Fire host Toronto and travel to New England on decision day. So there's definitely some ebb and flow to this schedule, and the Chicago Fire are going to have opportunities early on and over the summer to establish themselves right in the middle of that playoff pack. Like I said, that kind of 7 to 11, 7 to 10 range. Hopefully, they're vying for like 6 to 8 instead of that 7 to 10. However, based on where they've been the last decade, I would take 7, 8, 9 at that point in the season and at the end of the season. So those are the things to look out for with the Chicago Fire schedule. One other note before we close out the show, speaking of how rosters aren't done yet, the Chicago Fire's roster is still taking shape. They just announced the signing today, December 20th, and this time the Chicago Fire have signed midfielder Dylan Burso to a homegrown contract. And here is the press release from the club. Chicago Fire FC have signed homegrown midfielder Dylan Burso through the 2027 season with options for the 2028 and 2029 seasons, the club announced on Friday. A Chicago native, Borso represented the Fire's academy from U13 to U19 and featured in 9 matches for CF2 and MLS Next Pro. Borso spent 2024 as a freshman at Wake Forest University, where he was one of 5 players to appear in all 24 matches with 11 starts, tallied 4 goals and 4 assists, a team high. And now we get a quote from Greg Berhalter about this young talent. Dylan's journey is a great example of the development pathway that exists for talented young players at the club. From excelling in our academy to gaining valuable professional experience with CF2, Dylan has shown impressive determination and growth. After a standout freshman season at Wake Forest, we're excited to sign him to a homegrown player deal and help him continue his development and reach his goals. Dylan Borso is then quoted saying, "It's a dream come true to sign with the Chicago Fire. I would like to thank Coach Berhalter and the staff for having confidence in me and my dad for all his support along the way. I would also like to thank all of the coaches and support staff at the club who have helped me grow off and on the field over the past 8 years." And then they recap the Chicago Fire's performance last season, which we don't need to hear about anymore. So Dylan Borso signs with the Chicago Fire's first team. This is not something that stands out to me. A guy who, as a midfielder, I'm assuming he's playing a little bit more defensively. If he, led the team with 4 assists and had 4 goals, I didn't know if he'd be more of an attacking player, since that's who they've been picking up from CF2 in Amari Glasgow and David Poreba. But this could be, I'll have to do some more scouting, and we'll have to see where he gets some minutes in maybe that Coachella Invitational tournament, the preseason tournament, if he plays a little bit more defensively. But Wake Forest, phenomenal soccer program. The fact that Borso's come up through the Chicago Fire Academy system and CF2 shows that they know the kind of person he is and not just the kind of player he is. And that is something that is very important to Greg Berhalter as he rebuilds the Chicago Fire locker room culture, team culture, and expectations out of his players from the academy level all the way to the first team. So this is a signing that might have more impact on a pipeline than on the actual first team, but we'll have to keep an eye on the career of Dylan Borso. With that, I'm going to thank you all for tuning in one more time to the Feed the Fire podcast. Again, I'm your host, Nick. Make sure you're liking, subscribing, sharing, do all those things to help promote the show. Have a wonderful, wonderful holiday season. I'm going to try and get some content out next week, but please forgive me if I don't. It's the week of Christmas, and I took the week off. My kids are off, and I think we're going to go have some fun and probably get into a few snowball fights and just kind of see where that ends up, hopefully with hot chocolate. With that, thanks again, everyone. Have a great holiday season, and let's go Fire.